And I think it's almost impossible to discuss Stoicism in literature and art itself without going into Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, arguably his most important seminal work in his entire literary oeuvre. And it's a fascinating book indeed. It's sort of allegorical with the Christian Bible itself, not unlike Nietzsche's Vostok Zarathustra, because it's so imbued in the concept of the binary between good and evil. Although I assume most scholars and journalists would say that Blood Meridian really does lean more towards the nature of evil due to its warlike propensities. I don't take that view so much. I personally don't think that McCarthy wrote this work, condemning war just by virtue of it being unpleasant and catastrophic. I think he was writing this novel deeply influenced by Nietzsche and maybe Stoicism too, and also the King James Bible, like a lot of writers of philosophical persuasion are. But there's just something darkly fascinating about this work in particular. I love The Road, I love No Country for Old Men. Those two books and the movie of No Country for Old Men was how I actually got into McCarthy. And they're masterpieces in my view. But this book, Blood Meridian, is just something else entirely. And of course, my copy of Blood Meridian is tattered. But this line here I'm about to recite is the quintessential ethos of not just the novel itself, but I would argue McCarthy's whole back catalogue. And it typifies the Nietzschean worldview. It's a passage by George Holden, the main, I was going to say antagonist, though that would be a rather silly way of putting it, the main character within the book. And he says, "It makes no difference what men think of war," said the judge. "War endures. As well ask men what they think of stone. War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner, man. That is the way it was and will be. That way and not some other way." That is probably the crux of this book, the whole philosophical standpoint. But what does that actually mean? I mean, I agree with this notion. I'm a Nietzschean to a point. I don't follow any other man's personal worldview or philosophical system. But I do agree with most of the aphorisms in Vostok Zarathustra and Nietzsche's own planned magnum opus, The Will to Power, which he didn't actually finish. But I don't want to go on a tangent about Nietzsche so much. But why is this even fascinating in the first place? This harsh, ostensibly cruel, unforgiving terrain in which we find ourselves as men, women, children of any creed. You cannot say that life is a bed of roses. You cannot say that you can escape the inherent nature of war running through the substratum of not just life, but being itself. Because we are fairly ephemeral creatures, even in the emotional sense. We're not always happy, we're not always sad, we're not always positive, we're not always negative. So there's this inherent conflict at all times. Is that war? Well, according to George Holden in Blood Meridian, yeah. And it was there prior to our birth, prior to our insemination, if you want to go back further, and long shall it remain. How do you escape that? Well, the metaphysicians would say that you can escape that in the eternal afterlife, and that's for an entirely different subject, because we don't even know if we can verify that, but we certainly believe it. And this truism of war requires utmost stoicism, would it not? You would need to be stoic in order to live in accordance with not just nature, but also the metaphysical elements of life and of being, one's ontological state, in order to remain sane. Because you can go insane in this perpetual state of conflict, this life of inherent conflicts and differences and subjugations and you name it. And this blood meridian quote, I think, ties in nicely with this particular passage, this chapter of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, of war and warriors. Nietzsche says, "I do not exhort you to work, but to battle. I do not exhort you to peace, but to victory. May your work be a battle. May your peace be a victory." That's just one example from this entire passage. And it ties into this. These quotes I've recited, they tie into this perennial truth that transcends any preferences, orientations, or personal, ethical, moral standpoints people have. And that is, I think it's fundamentally human to find cowardice and hypocrisy aberrant. There is something repulsive to all human beings in nature itself to display any sense of hypocrisy or cowardice in relation to one's life or worldview or ideas and this sort of thing. So you can be a left-wing communist or a far-right fascist or a milquetoast centrist or whatever and say, I don't have any ideas. But we all find the notion of turning the other cheek towards this inherent natural battle, as Nietzsche had worded it, or this inescapable war, as Judge Holden had worded it. To shun this is not only silly and nonsensical, it is repulsive, it's deplorable, it's immoral. You have to fight in order to be. Is this even being discussed in mainstream, media, mainstream culture? I mean, sure, it's being discussed on the likes of Twitter and YouTube and all these plebeian kind of platforms. But is anyone actually, is anyone actually transcending this glibness of modern life? Of saying, well, I believe in this and I believe in that and that's immoral and I don't want to offend. I don't want to move away from the herd-like mentality because there is no engagement with life itself being this perpetual war of conflict. Though many people show it. It's like I mentioned the left-wing communists, or let's just say left-wingers and right-wingers. They're always going at each other. But the left primarily will say that they don't believe in war and conflict and endurance. They believe in peace and prosperity and equality and all these kinds of things. But they are battlers. They're fighters. They would have to be. You have a political orientation. You can't just run away from that. And of course, I'm not on the right either, because I think hypocrisy and cowardice runs right through them. Nor am I centrist. Because that doesn't mean anything. I am independent, but I'm politically aware. An aspiring Stoic, I guess you could say. I don't identify as a Stoic, nor even as a philosopher, but I'm engaged with those, in those circles. And this is why I think Stoicism is important. This is why I think transcendence is important. And this is why I think the Sigma archetype is interesting. Because it all starts with the individual. It's like action is a consequence of ideas. You can commit to action without any ideas, but usually that leads to unwanted consequences. So you need thinkers.